I never imagined that building my first house would end with $500,000 changing hands, a neighborhood board collapsing under its own lies, and 24 families finally getting answers they've been waiting years to hear. Because when this whole thing started, all I wanted was to move into a quiet little place outside Austin, drink my coffee on a back porch, and stop paying rent forever. Instead, one Tuesday morning, I pulled up to my construction site and stood there staring at an empty slab where $13,000 worth of custom building materials had disappeared overnight. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 36, a software developer who spends most days writing code from home, and unlike a lot of people in Texas Hill Country, I didn't grow up swinging hammers or running cattle. I grew up believing that if you worked hard, followed the rules, and treated people fairly, life usually returned the favor. That belief was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. I bought my lot in Cedar Ridge Preserve because everyone kept calling it the perfect community. Quiet roads, nice houses, families walking dogs every evening. The sales brochure practically smelled like fresh-cut grass and financial responsibility. There was an HOA, of course, but every nice neighborhood seemed to have one these days. They handed me a binder thick enough to stop a bullet, full of architectural guidelines, paint colors, roof angles, mailbox dimensions. Honestly, it felt excessive, but I figured rules were rules. I submitted every drawing, waited for every approval, paid every fee. My builder even joked that I probably had the cleanest paperwork in the entire subdivision. Building wasn't cheap. I'd spent years saving. I skipped vacations, drove the same pickup for almost a decade, turned down luxury purchases because I kept telling myself, someday I'll have my own place, and it'll all be worth it. The windows alone had taken almost 2 months to manufacture. Triple pane energy-efficient glass with custom black aluminum frames. My fiancée, Lauren, had picked out imported ceramic tile after spending 3 weekends comparing samples. The light fixtures came from a small design company in Oregon because she wanted something that didn't look like every other house in Texas. Every delivery felt like another step toward our future. Then, everything changed overnight. I parked outside the lot just after 7 that morning. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed the pallets were gone. I walked closer, thinking maybe the contractor had moved everything into the garage framing. There wasn't even a garage yet. My stomach dropped. The windows, gone. The tile, gone. The lighting crates, gone. Whoever did it hadn't made a mess. They'd taken exactly what they wanted, loaded it carefully, and left almost nothing behind except a few broken straps lying in the dirt. My builder, Mike, pulled in about 15 minutes later. He looked around, rubbed both hands over his face, then said quietly, "Ethan, this doesn't look like random thieves." That sentence stuck with me. Random thieves grab whatever they can. This felt organized. The police officer who responded took pictures, wrote notes, asked the usual questions. Had anyone threatened me? Did workers have access? Were there cameras? Unfortunately, no cameras yet. He apologized before leaving, and I could tell from the look on his face that he didn't expect the case to go very far. Construction theft happened all over Texas. Most of it never got solved. I was trying to accept that reality until later that afternoon, when Mike called me again. "You need to come back out here," he said. I found something weird. Sitting near the edge of the property was a fresh tire track that curved off the road instead of following the construction entrance. Mike had compared it with trucks working nearby. It didn't match any of theirs. One of the neighboring homeowners wandered over while we were looking at it. His name was Harold, retired Air Force, the kind of guy who noticed everything. He scratched his chin for a second before saying, "Funny thing, I couldn't sleep around midnight. Saw a dark pickup driving through here real slow. Thought it belonged to the HOA inspection committee." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because I've seen that truck before." "Whose truck?" He hesitated. "Pretty sure it belongs to Victor Lang." Victor Lang was president of the Cedar Ridge HOA. We had met exactly twice. Once during my architectural review, where he'd smiled without ever really looking at me, and another time when he complained that my temporary construction fencing wasn't centered perfectly on the lot. The man loved authority the way some people loved barbecue. I wanted to dismiss Harold's comment immediately because accusing the HOA president of stealing building materials sounded insane, but something about the way Mike stayed silent bothered me. Finally, he sighed. "You know, you're not actually the first client I've had lose materials out here." I turned toward him. "What do you mean? Different jobs, different years, windows, appliances, lumber, Everybody blamed construction theft. Did anyone ever catch the thieves? He shook his head slowly. No, but it's strange how it always happened in this neighborhood. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I stopped thinking about replacing windows. I stopped worrying about insurance claims. Instead, one question kept repeating in my head. What if this wasn't theft at all? What if someone had built an entire business around stealing from people who were too busy building their dream homes to notice the pattern? If that's where your mind is going to, you're about to see why the next 90 days completely changed my life. The funny thing about writing software for a living is that it changes the way your brain works. You stop looking at events as isolated moments and start looking for patterns, dependencies, repeated behaviors, bugs. Every system leaves fingerprints if you watch it long enough. And I suddenly had this uncomfortable feeling that Cedar Ridge wasn't dealing with random crime, it was dealing with a system. So instead of ordering replacement materials the next morning like everyone expected me to, I canceled every shipment, called my insurance company, and told them I needed a week before filing the final claim. Lauren thought I was exhausted, maybe even in denial. She sat across from me at dinner, reached over and squeezed my hand. You know none of this is your fault, right? I nodded but couldn't bring myself to answer. Something kept bothering me. If someone wanted to steal construction materials, why choose custom windows that couldn't easily be resold? Why ignore expensive tools sitting inside the trailer? Why leave thousands of dollars in copper wiring untouched? None of it made sense unless the thief already knew exactly where those windows were going. 3 days later, I hired a private security company. 6 hidden 4K cameras went up around the property disguised inside utility boxes, birdhouses, and temporary electrical panels. Then I did something my contractor laughed at until he realized I wasn't joking. I programmed one of my hobby drones to fly automated patrol routes every night between midnight and 4 in the morning, silently recording thermal and standard video. You really think they'll come back? Mike asked. Maybe not for my lot, I said. But if this is organized, they'll hit someone else's. At the same time, I hired someone even more important. Her name was Rebecca Nolan, a forensic accountant who had spent nearly 15 years tracing financial fraud for insurance companies before opening her own consulting business. She didn't look like the dramatic TV accountants people imagine. She wore jeans, carried an old leather notebook, and spoke so quietly you almost leaned forward without realizing it. During our first meeting, she listened to my theory without interrupting once. When I finished, she closed the notebook. Ethan, she said calmly, people who steal money usually get caught because they become greedy. People who steal inventory think they're smarter because nobody follows physical assets. If someone inside that HOA is involved, we won't find them by chasing trucks. We'll find them by following paperwork. That sentence changed everything. Texas law allowed homeowners to request certain HOA financial records. And because I was an owner, the board couldn't simply refuse without creating legal problems for themselves. Rebecca helped me draft the requests carefully. Vendor invoices, maintenance expenses, architectural review contracts, landscaping purchases, community improvement budgets. The documents started arriving in batches, hundreds of pages, then thousands. At first they looked painfully ordinary. Landscaping, irrigation, fence repairs, pool maintenance. But Rebecca kept placing little yellow tabs throughout the stacks. 1, then 10, then 40. By the end of the 3rd day, her desk looked like a forest of yellow paper. Come here, she said. She pointed to 2 invoices from completely different years, different vendors, different projects, identical formatting errors, same font, same spacing, same typo in the company address. That's impossible, I muttered. Exactly. We kept digging. More duplicate invoices appeared. Companies that supposedly delivered expensive construction materials couldn't be found anywhere. Phone numbers were disconnected. Business licenses didn't exist. Several vendor addresses turned out to be empty lots or mailbox rental stores. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. Somebody manufactured these records. Then came the first real break. Every suspicious payment required 2 signatures. One belonged to HOA President Victor Lang. The other belonged to the board treasurer, Daniel Pierce. Rebecca quietly slid a spreadsheet across the table. These 2 names appear together on almost every questionable transaction for 6 years. 6 years. This had been happening long before I bought my lot. We still didn't know how the stolen materials fit into the fraud until another coincidence blew the whole thing open. Lauren and I were driving through the neighborhood one Saturday afternoon looking at completed homes, partly to cheer ourselves up. Then she suddenly grabbed my arm. "Ethan, stop the truck." I pulled over. She pointed toward a newly finished house about 3 streets away. At first I didn't understand. Then I saw them. Black aluminum window frames, same dimensions, same custom corner profile, same manufacturer. There was one tiny imperfection I'd noticed during delivery. A barely visible scratch near the lower right frame where the shipping crate had rubbed against the metal. I walked closer, pretending to admire the landscaping. The scratch was still there. I just stood frozen. Those weren't similar windows. They were my windows. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knocked on the front door. A young couple answered, smiling politely. "Beautiful house," I said. "Can I ask who supplied your windows?" The husband frowned. "Honestly, we don't know. The HOA recommended a contractor after our original supplier had delays." "Did you ever meet him?" "No. Everything went through the HOA construction committee." Lauren looked at me. Neither of us said a word until we got back into the truck. Finally, she whispered, "Oh my God. They're stealing from one homeowner and selling to another." Exactly. It wasn't simple theft. It was inventory laundering disguised as neighborhood management. That discovery gave me enough confidence to stop working quietly. I posted a short message in the neighborhood Facebook group. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple question. Has anyone building in Cedar Ridge experienced missing materials or unexplained construction delays? I expected maybe 2 replies. By bedtime, there were 27 comments. By the next morning, my inbox was overflowing. Missing appliances. Missing hardwood flooring. Roofing bundles disappearing. Cabinets arriving damaged, then mysteriously being replaced through HOA-approved suppliers. One retired firefighter told me he lost nearly $9,000 in stone veneer 5 years earlier and had been convinced his subcontractor stole it. Another family said their garage doors vanished during framing, only to be replaced weeks later by a contractor recommended by the architectural committee. The stories were nearly identical. Same excuses, same delays, same board members involved. That's when I created a shared database. Every homeowner uploaded invoices, timelines, delivery receipts, photographs, insurance claims, contractor names, and HOA correspondence. Night after night, I sat at my kitchen table connecting dots while Lauren brought coffee around midnight and quietly kissed the top of my head before going to bed. Some evenings, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Then another family would upload another document that fit perfectly into the timeline. 89 days passed that way. Work during daylight. Investigation every evening. Weekends spent knocking on doors with printed spreadsheets instead of relaxing. The more evidence we collected, the uglier the picture became. Rebecca eventually estimated that more than $180,000 in construction materials had disappeared over 6 years. But proving fraud in court required more than suspicious invoices. It required intent. Then Victor Lang made the mistake that destroyed everything. My drone captured his pickup entering another active construction site at 1:42 in the morning. 36 minutes later, another truck arrived. The next morning, that homeowner reported expensive hardwood flooring missing. Victor claimed he was performing a routine property inspection at 2 o'clock in the morning on an unfinished lot. Even his own explanation sounded ridiculous. While all of this was happening, Daniel Pierce apparently realized people were getting dangerously close. According to someone inside the HOA office, he started deleting emails and cleaning out filing cabinets. Too late. Rebecca had already convinced several homeowners to preserve years of electronic correspondence, and one former board volunteer quietly admitted that automatic cloud backups had never been disabled. Every deleted email still existed. When attorneys finally reviewed those backups, they found exactly what Rebecca had predicted months earlier: conversations about moving inventory, fake vendor approvals, discussions about profit percentages, messages joking that homeowners blamed contractors every single time. Reading those emails made my stomach turn. We weren't victims because we were careless. We were victims because they believed nobody would ever compare notes. That illusion was about to end, because the next phone call I received came from one of the most respected class action attorneys in Central Texas. And after reviewing everything we'd gathered, he said 7 words I'll never forget. "I think we can bury these people." When our attorney filed a lawsuit, I expected the HOA to come out swinging. Instead, they tried something almost insulting. Their lawyer called mine with what he described as a reasonable settlement offer: $50,000. I actually laughed when my attorney repeated the number over speakerphone. Tell them they forgot a zero, I said. He smiled. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. By then this had stopped being about replacing my windows. 24 families had spent years blaming contractors, doubting neighbors, arguing with insurance companies, even questioning themselves because a handful of people in expensive polo shirts had figured out they could hide behind the words community management. We weren't asking for charity anymore. We were asking for accountability. Discovery moved quickly. And once the financial records, cloud backups, surveillance footage, and homeowner statements were lined up side by side, the defense started falling apart faster than any of us expected. Every excuse contradicted another excuse. Every missing invoice was matched by another homeowner's delivery receipt. Every fake vendor eventually led back to the same handful of approvals. Then came the public board meeting that everyone in Cedar Ridge still talks about today. More than 60 homeowners packed the clubhouse. Some stood along the walls because every chair had already been taken. I remember walking in and seeing faces I'd only known through spreadsheets and email threads. Families who had spent years thinking they were the only ones. Victor Lang sat at the front table wearing the same confident smile I'd seen during my architectural review months earlier, but it disappeared the moment our attorney began handing binders to each board member. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody made a dramatic speech. The documents did all the talking. Page after page. Signature after signature. Invoice after invoice. At one point, Victor reached for a glass of water, but his hand was shaking so badly he nearly knocked it over. Someone from the audience quietly said, "Read page 43. The room became so silent you could hear the air conditioner running overhead. Daniel Pierce never even looked up. He just stared at the table while our attorney described the email backups showing discussions about moving homeowners' materials through HOA-approved contractors and splitting the profits afterward. Then one elderly woman stood up. Her husband had passed away the year before, and she told everyone how she had spent months believing he'd made expensive construction mistakes before his death because materials kept disappearing from their project. She looked directly at Victor and said, "I spent 2 years apologizing to a man who never did anything wrong because of you." I don't think there was a single dry eye in the room after that. Victor finally stood, adjusted his jacket, looked around at 62 homeowners who refused to look away, and quietly announced his resignation. He never once made eye contact with anyone as he walked out. Daniel wasn't able to walk away quite so easily. Criminal investigators had already opened their own case based on the financial evidence, and within weeks he was formally charged with fraud and several related offenses. The HOA's insurance carrier immediately began distancing itself from the former board, realizing the losses were tied to intentional misconduct rather than simple administrative mistakes. Suddenly, the same people who had ignored homeowners for years were desperate to negotiate. This time the conversation sounded very different. The final agreement totaled $520,000, enough to compensate 24 affected families for stolen materials, replacement costs, project delays, legal expenses, and a portion of the financial damage caused by years of deception. When the paperwork was finally signed, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I mostly felt relief. Relief that people who had blamed themselves could finally stop carrying that weight. Relief that Lauren and I could finish our home without wondering what would disappear next. Relief that the truth had actually mattered. But the biggest surprise came a month later during the election for a completely new HOA board. Several neighbors asked me to run for treasurer. My first reaction was immediate. Absolutely not. After everything that's happened, why would I want anything to do with the HOA? Harold, the retired Air Force neighbor who first mentioned Victor's truck, laughed and put a hand on my shoulder. Because if honest people refuse the job, dishonest people eventually take it back. I couldn't argue with that, so I accepted. One of the very first policies our new board adopted required dual approval for every payment, independent quarterly financial audits, open access to vendor contracts, and transparent digital records that every homeowner could review. No more mystery invoices. No more closed-door decisions. No more trusting one person simply because they held a title. The following year, local real estate agents began mentioning something unexpected. Buyers who had once avoided Cedar Ridge because of the scandal were coming back. Home values climbed as confidence returned. Trust, it turned out, was worth more than perfectly trimmed lawns or fancy entrance signs. Sometimes I sit on my back porch now, coffee in one hand, watching the sunrise through the very windows someone tried to steal from me, and I think about how close I came to filing an insurance claim, replacing the materials, and moving on with my life. If I had, none of this would have happened. 23 other families might still believe they were unlucky. The people responsible might still be running that neighborhood today. So maybe the real lesson isn't about HOAs at all. Maybe it's that corruption survives because everyone assumes they're the only victim. The moment people start comparing stories, the whole illusion begins to crack. Now I'm curious what you think. If you discovered your HOA had been quietly taking advantage of homeowners for years, would you have accepted the first settlement and walked away? Or would you have kept fighting until the entire system changed? Let me know in the comments, because I genuinely like to hear where you draw the line between moving on and demanding justice.